corridor felt too narrow for how fast Alara was running. Her chest burned, each step pounding through her like a drum. Somewhere ahead, a nurse's voice cracked over the noise. "We're losing her." Her heart lurched, Iris. The world blurred into a tunnel of white coats and urgent voices. Through the swinging doors, she caught flashes of bright monitors, the high-pitched alarms screaming for help, and a small body on the table, far too still. Have you ever had one moment where the floor gave way beneath you, where everything you thought was safe shattered in a heartbeat? For Alara Whitford, that moment had arrived, tearing through her like glass. Hours earlier, the laughter of her twin daughters had filled their home. Now they lay in this building fighting for every breath, and the only person with the skill to save them was the same man who had once left her without a word. If you believe in second chances, in stories that stay with you long after they end, then now's the time. Tap that subscribe button, join me, and let's walk through this together. She pushed through another set of doors, almost colliding with a nurse carrying a tray of surgical tools. Her breathing came in sharp bursts, her hands trembled. Iris was in surgery already. June's turn was next. 2 lives balanced on the edge, and every minute mattered. The lead nurse met her halfway down the hall, her expression tight. "We have our best in the operating room, but you should know who it is." Alara braced herself. "Who?" The nurse said his name. Her pulse faltered. Her stomach clenched so hard it hurt. The sound of it, deep in her memory, wrapped in 1,000 emotions, was like being pulled back into another lifetime, one she had fought to bury. Memories flooded in before she could stop them. The warmth of his hands on her bare back, his lips brushing the curve of her shoulder in the dark, the way he had whispered promises against her skin, steady and sure, as though the night would never end. She remembered how it felt to wake in the glow of his arms, believing she'd found forever, only to open her eyes the next morning to an empty space beside her. And now, he was just a few doors away, holding the lives of her children in his hands. Alara's knees weakened. Her first instinct was to turn and run, to find another way. But the monitors ahead beeped urgently, pulling her forward. The past could wait, the present could not. She stepped toward the waiting area, her pulse thrumming, her mind torn between the man who had once touched her like she was the only person in the world, and the surgeon she needed more than anyone right now. The antiseptic tang of the hospital filled her lungs as Alara stepped into the waiting area. A row of metal chairs lined the wall, but she couldn't sit. Her legs carried her in small, restless circles, every nerve alive with fear. Through the glass panel of the double doors, she could see staff moving quickly, their movements precise, controlled, but too quick for her to read their faces. She searched for any sign of her daughters, but all she caught were glimpses of white sheets, masked doctors, and the rhythmic flash of monitor lights. A nurse appeared beside her, clipboard pressed against her chest. "Mrs. Whitford?" Alara turned sharply. "Yes? Are they?" "They're stable for now, but both girls sustained significant internal trauma. Iris is already in surgery. June will follow immediately after. These are delicate procedures. There's no room for error." Her throat felt tight. Who's operating?" The nurse hesitated, eyes flicking to the floor before she answered. "Dr. Duval." The name hit harder than she expected. A rush of heat spread through her chest, followed by a sharp twist in her stomach. She forced her voice to stay steady. "Are you certain?" "Yes. He was on site for a conference when the call came in. He volunteered without hesitation." The nurse's tone softened. "He's the best we have." Alara turned away before the nurse could see the war in her eyes. The best they have, and the last man she had ever wanted to face again. She had told herself, for years, that if their paths crossed again, she would walk the other way. She had rehearsed what she would say if he ever tried to explain. She had imagined standing tall, unshaken. But now, in this cold hallway, none of that mattered. Her daughters needed him. She could hate him later, if there was a later to reach. The hallway leading to the operating room seemed impossibly long. She followed it halfway before stopping outside a wide observation window. Inside, doctors in sterile gowns moved, with focused intensity around the small, fragile form of her child. Her heart clenched at the sight of Iris lying so still beneath the bright lights, and there he was. Hair shorter than she remembered, jawline sharper, movements precise as he directed the team around him. He looked older, yes, but there was something else. A gravity in the way he carried himself. His voice, muffled through the glass, still cut through the chaos with the same quiet authority she remembered. It was him. 8 years had done nothing to dull the impact of seeing him. She remembered every detail of their last night together, the warmth of his touch, The way he had looked at her like she was the only thing that made sense, and the emptiness she'd felt the next day when he vanished without a word. Her fingers curled into fists at her sides. She didn't want to remember, not here, not now. But the past had a way of forcing itself into the present when she least needed it. The door behind her opened. She didn't turn. She could feel him there, close enough that she caught the faint scent of his cologne, one she had tried to forget. Alara, just her name, nothing more. It had carried the weight of years they had lost. She kept her gaze on the window. Do your job. That's all I care about. I will. His voice was steady, but she thought she heard something in it, something he was holding back. I'll bring her back to you, both of them. Her jaw tightened. See that you do. He didn't argue. He didn't try to explain. Without another word, he turned and stepped back into the operating room. She stood there for a long moment, hands trembling, willing herself to breathe. The sharp ache in her chest wasn't just fear for her daughters. It was the jarring knowledge that she still felt something when she saw him, something she didn't want to name. In the waiting area, she lowered herself into one of the chairs, elbows on her knees, head in her hands. The murmur of voices, the beeping of distant monitors, the faint hum of ventilation, all of it blended into a low, constant noise. A child's cry echoed faintly from somewhere down the hall, pulling her head up. It wasn't hers, but it was a reminder this building was filled with people waiting, praying, bargaining with whatever higher power they believed in. Her eyes drifted back to the clock on the wall. Every minute that passed felt both too slow and too fast. Somewhere behind those closed doors, the man she had once loved was working to save the two most precious lives she had ever known. She hated that she had to trust him. She hated that trust was the only choice she had. A deep breath. She straightened her shoulders. For Iris, for June. She could endure anything. Even him. If you were in her place right now, if the only person who could save your children was the one who had walked away from you without looking back, what would you do? Tell me in the comments. I want to hear your thoughts. 8 years earlier, Alara had been in her second year of nursing school. The schedule was punishing. Double shifts, late-night study sessions, and the constant hum of fluorescent lights in the hospital corridors. She had told herself she was too busy for distractions. Then he walked into the ward. She'd first noticed his hands, confident, steady, moving with purpose as he examined a patient chart. His presence was magnetic in a way she couldn't quite explain. There was a calm authority in the way he spoke to patients, the unshakable way he guided the team during emergencies. But outside the operating room, there was an ease to him, a quiet smile, a quick remark that could pull a laugh out of her even when she was exhausted. Their conversations began in passing, a question about a case, a shared coffee during a short break. She found herself looking for him without meaning to, catching glimpses of him at the nurse's station, leaning over a chart, the corners of his mouth lifting when their eyes met. One night, near the end of a shift, they were both assigned to an emergency case. It had been chaos for hours, the kind of case that left adrenaline buzzing in her veins long after it ended. By the time they finally stepped into the staff lounge, the rest of the team had gone. You handled yourself well, he said, tossing his gloves into the bin. She shook her head. I was just trying to keep up. You did more than that. His gaze lingered on her, steady, unflinching. You're better than you think. The way he said it, as if it was a simple truth, made her pulse quicken. From that night, the rhythm between them shifted. Dinners in the hospital cafeteria became late-night meals at a small diner across from campus. The first time he touched her hand across the table, it felt deliberate, as if he wanted her to notice. One evening, after a particularly long shift, he offered her a ride home. She'd meant to decline. Instead, she found herself in the passenger seat, the city lights sliding across the dashboard. They barely spoke during the drive, but the quiet felt natural, almost intimate. When he pulled up in front of her apartment building, she hesitated before opening the door. Do you want to come up? She asked, the words leaving her before she could second-guess them. He studied her for a moment, as though weighing something, then nodded. Inside, the small apartment felt even smaller with him there. She set her bag down, suddenly unsure of what to do with her hands. He stepped closer, brushing a strand of hair from her face, and that simple touch undid every wall she'd built. Their first kiss was slow, unhurried, as though both of them wanted to memorize it. His hands framed her face, his thumbs grazing her skin. The kiss deepened, the space between them disappearing. They moved together as if they had always known how. The rest of that night was a blur of heat and tenderness, clothes discarded without rush, quiet laughter between breaths, whispered words she still remembered. He touched her as though she was something rare, something he didn't want to break. In the dark, they lay tangled together, her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. She woke to sunlight on the sheets, the faint scent of coffee drifting from the kitchen. For one suspended moment she thought, this is it, the start of something real. But when she stepped into the kitchen, the counter was empty, the coffee was cold, and the apartment was silent. Her calls went unanswered. His locker at the hospital was cleared out. No explanation, no goodbye. She had waited for days, certain there was a reason. Weeks passed, then months, and the truth became impossible to ignore. He was gone. She buried herself in work, finished school, and learned to raise her daughters without leaning on anyone. But there were nights, quiet nights, when she would think about the warmth of that last evening, and the way it had all turned to nothing by morning. And now, 8 years later, she was standing in the same building where it began, with the same man holding her daughters' lives in his hands. Alara sensed the shift in the room before she saw the source of it. Conversations quieted, nurses straightened, the doors to the surgical wing parted, and a woman in a fitted charcoal suit stepped through with the sure stride of someone used to entire floors bending around her schedule. "Ms. Whitford?" the woman asked, voice low, polished. "I'm Celine Varel." She extended a hand that wore a thin platinum band, not quite a ring of promise, but close enough to carry meaning. Alara hesitated, then took it. Celine's grip was cool, precise, as if warmth would be an indulgence. "I oversee Duval Medical Group," Celine continued. "Our staff alerted me the moment Dr. Duval went into the operating room for your daughters." Her gaze flicked toward the corridor that led to surgery. He stepped in without hesitation. "That is typical of him, typical." The word caught in Alara's chest. Caring and controlled, yes. But typical had never felt like the right word for him. Celine noticed the subtle change in Alara's expression. She smiled, pleasant but guarded. "I can imagine this is overwhelming. I'm here to make sure everything you and the girls need is handled quickly." Alara's voice came out rough. "I want to see them as soon as I'm allowed." They moved to a small consultation room with a glass wall and a table that looked more suited to contract signings than anxious mothers. Celine remained standing. So did Alara. "I know you've been briefed," Celine said, folding her arms. "The procedures are delicate. This facility is well equipped, and Dr. Duval's skill is unmatched." "You keep saying his name like it's a guarantee," Alara said. "I'm grateful he's in there. Gratitude doesn't erase history." Something unreadable crossed Celine's face, quick as a blink. "You know him." Alara didn't answer. She didn't need to. Celine set her tablet on the table. "I won't ask how. It's none of my business." Her pause was almost imperceptible. "What matters is outcomes, which is why I'm arranging a transfer to one of our private centers once both girls are stable. Shorter wait times, more specialized rehabilitation." "A transfer?" Alara shook her head. "They just went under. I won't move them through this building, onto a stretcher, into an ambulance, just to satisfy a corporate preference." "This isn't about preference," Celine replied evenly. "It's about resources. We can fast-track everything. Imaging, respiratory support, pediatric therapy without delay. Insurance approvals will follow. I'll deal with it." "You'll deal with it," Alara repeated. "That sounds convenient for you. For me, it sounds like you're trying to remove them from the place where the person they already trust is standing over them." Celine lifted her gaze to the glass wall, where the reflection held both their silhouettes. "He trusts this system because he built it," she said softly. "But he is one person. When he steps out, the rest must hold." Alara exhaled. "When he steps out, I will be there. That's what matters to me." Silence stretched between them. The hallway beyond the glass murmured with footfalls and hushed talk. Celine studied Alara the way an executive studies a report, reading for flaws, risks, leverage. "You seem strong," Celine said finally. "I admire that. Strength gets families through nights like this. It also tends to hold grudges." "What are you implying?" "That you have your reasons for the way you look at him," Celine answered. "No judgment in the words, only assessment. Which means you might not be inclined to accept my help. I'm asking you to consider it anyway, for the girls. If your help keeps them from pain, I'll take it," Alara said. "If your help creates distance between them and the one person I know won't rest until they're safe, I won't." A flicker, barely there, passed through Celine's eyes. Not anger, not surprise, something closer to calculation with a thread of doubt woven in. She picked up her tablet, tapped once, then looked up. "Understood. We'll hold the transfer order," she said. For now, Elara echoed. A knock sounded, brief and polite. The lead nurse stepped in. "Miss Virel, Miss Whitford, quick update. Iris is responding to the intervention. Dr. Duval requests additional imaging prep for June. He'll brief you when he can." Elara nodded, swallowing against the dryness in her throat. The nurse left. "You speak like a partner," Elara said. "Is that what you are?" Celine's mouth curved. "I'm the person who makes sure his genius has infrastructure." She let the word sit, then added, "We are close. The kind of close that invites assumptions. Those assumptions are usually correct." Elara held her gaze. "Usually." Celine's smile didn't falter, but the air seemed to tighten by a degree. "I came to reassure you, to be transparent, to prevent misunderstandings." She lifted the tablet again. "May I ask something in return?" "You can ask." When he entered that room, Celine said, "Did you see the way he looked through the glass, as if he could feel more than the usual obligation? I study him for a living. I recognize when his attention narrows, when everything else fades. It happened today." She lowered her voice. "It did not happen because I was standing there." The admission surprised Elara more than any polished pitch could have. "Why tell me that?" "Because I intend to protect him," Celine said. "No softness now. From media distraction, from board whispers, from personal complications that could compromise outcomes, including old feelings that might surface when they shouldn't." "Old feelings belong to me," Elara replied. "Complications too. I'll manage both." "I hope you do," Celine said. "For everyone's sake." She stepped toward the door, then paused, eyes dipping to the chain around Elara's neck. A small pendant rested there, simple and bright. "That piece," Celine said. "It's vintage. He has a good eye for gifts." Elara touched the pendant without meaning to. She remembered a past birthday, a quiet booth, a small box pressed into her palm. She had kept the necklace because it reminded her of who she had been before the morning everything changed. "He gave it to you," Celine said, not a question. Elara let her hand fall. "I don't owe you an inventory of my life." "Of course," Celine opened the door. "But I read patterns. They help me predict where pressure points will form. Today I saw a pattern I haven't seen in years, which is—" His priorities shifted, Celine said quietly. "I felt it the moment he requested the case. I always feel it when his focus moves away from me." With that, she left. Elara stood very still, the consultation room suddenly too small for her thoughts. She stepped out into the corridor, drawn again to the observation window. The surgical team moved with fluid coordination. At the center of it, Dr. Duval adjusted an instrument, eyes locked on the field, every motion decisive. She watched his hands and heard a memory rise, unbidden, his voice telling her once late at night how he trained his mind to quiet itself until only the essential remained, how every cut carried a promise, how failure was a story he refused to write. Celine's words pressed against that memory. His priorities shifted. Elara felt a sting of fear at what that might cost him, cost her, cost the girls. She didn't want anyone sacrificing judgment for emotion. Not today. Not ever. A volunteer walked past with a cart of blankets. Elara stopped her. "May I take one? For when they're out?" "Of course." The young woman handed her a soft blue square. Elara pressed it to her chest as if she could store warmth for later. Minutes slid by in careful increments. A tech wheeled imaging equipment down the hall for June. The nurse returned with forms Elara barely saw, signing where she was told. At some point, Celine reappeared at the far end of the corridor, speaking quietly with a hospital attorney. Their conversation looked clinical, tidy, inevitable. She belonged to a world of schedules and signatures. Elara belonged to a world where two small hands had once reached for her at breakfast and would reach again, if fate allowed. She closed her eyes, steadying herself. This was the obstacle she hadn't anticipated. Not a machine failing, not a missed dosage, but a woman who loved order standing at the threshold of their history. A woman who looked at Elara and saw risk. Elara opened her eyes and focused on the window, on the team, on the man inside who had left without a word and was now giving everything he had to bring her child back. Whatever came after this, explanations, apologies, choices, could wait. For this hour, there was only one measure that mattered, 2 heartbeats returning to strength. Beyond the glass, the lead nurse lifted her head as if hearing a change only experience could detect. A few moments later, a second monitor settled into a calmer rhythm. Elara exhaled, shoulders loosening by a fraction. At the far end of the hall, Celine watched the same shift on the screens. Her posture didn't change, but her eyes did. She held Alara's gaze for a single beat, then looked away first. The hum of the surgical wing was different now, slower, more deliberate. The rush of urgency had given way to the kind of focus that meant the critical moments were passing into steadier ground. Alara stood near the observation window, unable to look away from the man at the center of it all. He didn't glance up, not once, his attention fixed entirely on the work before him. But even from here, she could feel the weight of his presence, the same force that had once drawn her in without warning. When the procedure wrapped and the team began their checks, he stepped back, pulling off his gloves with a precision that matched every other movement he'd made. A nurse said something to him, and he nodded before turning toward the door. Alara's pulse picked up. She told herself to breathe evenly, to keep her voice calm, to remember this wasn't about him, it was about her girls. But when the door swung open and he walked toward her, the years between them seemed to shrink to nothing. They stopped a few feet apart. Alara, his voice was quieter than she remembered, but still carried that deep steadiness that once made her believe every word. She didn't move. 8 years. His jaw tightened, as though the number hit harder than he expected. You didn't think I'd still be here? She cut in. Or that I'd recognize you? His gaze softened for a moment, then sharpened again. I knew you'd recognize me. I didn't know it would be like this. He glanced toward the operating room. They're strong. Iris is responding. June's scans are next. I'll be in there until they're both out of danger. Her arms folded across her chest, not in defiance, but to keep herself steady. Good. That's all that matters right now. A pause. It's not all that matters to me, he said quietly. She opened her mouth to answer, but a sharp alarm pierced the corridor, quick, insistent, and close. A code was called over the intercom, and staff began moving fast toward another wing. The interruption was like a slap of reality, pulling both of them back into the immediacy of where they stood. He looked down the hall, saw that the commotion wasn't for their case, then refocused on her. We don't have time to go over the past, but I need you to know, I'm here for them. I won't leave until this is done. Her voice caught despite herself. You left before. His eyes closed briefly. I know, and I'll explain why. Just not now. If you're still here, you're feeling this tension as much as I am. Tap like so I know you're with me, she said to the viewers, her voice quieter, her gaze locked on him. He stepped a fraction closer, lowering his voice. When I walked in and saw them, saw you, I realized I'd been preparing for this without knowing it. Every skill I've built, every choice I've made, it all led to this moment. That almost sounds like you're trying to make it fate, she said. Maybe it is, he replied. Her throat tightened. She didn't want him to see the impact his words were having, but the part of her that had once known the warmth of his touch was stirring in ways she couldn't control. I can't think about us right now, she said, keeping her voice steady. I can't afford to. I'm not asking you to, he answered. I'm asking you to trust me enough to keep your girls alive. That's the one thing I can still give you, she said. For a moment they simply looked at each other, the air thick with all the things neither could say. He was the first to break it, glancing toward the surgical prep room where staff were setting up for June's turn. I have to go, he said. When this is over, we'll talk. She gave a small nod. Go. Don't stop until it's done. He moved past her, close enough that she caught the faint trace of his scent, a memory from another life. She didn't turn to watch him leave, but she heard the firm set of his footsteps fade into the controlled urgency of the surgical wing. Alone again in the corridor, she pressed her back against the wall, closing her eyes for just a second. She hadn't expected to feel this. Not after all the years, not after all the silence. But seeing him, hearing his voice, had shaken something loose inside her. And now, she wasn't sure if she feared losing her daughters more, or letting herself remember what it felt like to be loved by him. The second set of doors sealed with a pneumatic hush, and the corridor fell into a quieter rhythm that made every sound sharper. The click of shoe covers, the rustle of sterile gowns, the steady metronome of monitors rising and falling like held breath. In operating room 2, lights circled the table where June lay under warmed blankets, her small chest lifting in careful guided beats. Dr. Duval lifted his hands for the scrub nurse. Gloves snapped into place. Across the field, anesthesia called out vitals, crisp and calm. The room settled into that rare concentration where each person's role fit perfectly into the next. No wasted movement, no scattered chatter, only exactness. He studied the imaging on screen, tracing the path he would take. Not with his finger, but with his eyes, committing the sequence to memory. Suction ready. Retractors on my cue. His tone was even, measured. "I'm going to free the compromised tissue first. Watch for changes in pressure." Outside, Alara folded herself into a chair in the waiting area and couldn't stay there. She stood, sat, stood again. The clock's second hand dragged and lurched at the same time. A kind volunteer offered tea. It cooled untouched. She tried to pray and found that the only words that came were their names, June. Iris, over and over, like a charm against chaos. She walked to the vending machines and back. She counted floor tiles. She reread the same paragraph on a poster about hand hygiene until the letters slid around. When she finally forced herself to sit, she realized she still held the blue blanket meant for Iris. She folded and unfolded it without looking, smoothing the same corner again and again. In the operating room, the first incision was small, economical. "More light here," he said. "Thank you." He worked the plane of tissue free with a pressure that was gentle and unyielding at once. The scrub nurse understood his rhythm and met it. Instruments arrived in his palm at the exact angle he preferred. He didn't look up, but he was aware of the entire room, the anesthetist's adjustments, the circulating nurse checking line integrity, the resident standing still enough to be part of the floor. "Clamp," he murmured, a subtle shift on the monitor. "Good. Hold there." A nurse at the board recorded times. The ventilator whispered. The room breathed as one organism. Alara paced the hall. The lead nurse checked in, delivering the kind of update that meant, "They are working, nothing has gone wrong, we are where we expected to be." It should have soothed her. It didn't. Relief, she learned, was a fragile thing, present for a breath, gone the next. A man in a maintenance uniform changed a light bulb nearby. The small absurdity of it, normal tasks continuing while her world balanced on a thread, made her throat tighten. She closed her eyes, concentrated on a single memory. June at breakfast, carefully splitting her toast with Iris because the halves were never equal and fairness mattered. Iris pretending not to care, and then grinning when June pushed the larger piece across the table. Back in the OR, a tiny bleed opened exactly where the scans had hinted it might. Suction, irrigation. There, he found the source, controlled it without haste. "Keep the field clear." He did not raise his voice. He never needed to. The room tuned to his pace and stayed there. He moved deeper, angling his view, confirming landmarks by touch as much as sight. Each maneuver had a reason, each pause a calculation. Years of repetition had burned the sequence into his hands, but habit alone had never saved anyone. It was attention that did. Absolute, relentless attention. Pressure stable, anesthesia called. "Proceeding," he answered. Alara wiped her eyes with the heel of her hand and told herself to stop. She wasn't the one under the lights. Her job was endurance. She checked her phone with no idea what she expected to find. A string of messages from neighbors. A photo from a friend who had taken the twins to the park once and captioned it with 2 heart emojis months ago. She put the phone face down and felt the strange weight of the world still running outside these walls. Buses stopping, ovens beeping, someone buying apples and not knowing any of this was happening. Celine appeared at the far end of the hall, speaking quietly with the charge nurse. When their eyes met, Celine gave a short nod, not triumph, not pity, something nearer to acknowledgement. She didn't approach. She didn't need to. The message had been delivered earlier. Help would be offered when help aligned with outcomes. Anything else would wait. In OR2, the most delicate portion began. "I have it," he said softly. "Don't rush the retraction. A pressure change. A breath held by everyone who understood what that could mean." He adjusted a fraction, felt the shift through the instrument as if through skin. "Good. Hold steady." The resident whispered a question, careful not to upset the air. He answered without looking away, turning the question into a teaching point in a single sentence, enough to inform, not enough to distract. Then he returned to silence, a silence that felt complete. Time stretched and nodded. Alara watched a cleaner mop the opposite hallway in patient practice curves. She forced herself to take 10 slow breaths because a nurse had told her, gently, that oxygen helps a brain hold itself together. She counted them. 9 came easily. On the 10th, her breath hitched and wouldn't go deeper. She stood, walked 3 steps, tried again. Inner 2, suture. Now the second. He made 3 loops, set the knot exactly, tested the security with a lift so slight it barely changed the view. Again. He worked until the monitor numbers told the story he needed to hear. He waited longer than a lesser hand would have, watching stability prove itself. Only then did he start closing. Outside, Alara lowered herself into the chair as if it might reject her. She folded the blue blanket smaller until it was a square the size of her palm. She pressed it there, against the center of her chest, a placeholder for pulse. A nurse appeared, the same one who had guided her earlier. "He's closing for June," she said gently. "Everything is holding." Alara swallowed hard. "Thank you." The nurse's eyes softened. "I'll be back as soon as I can with more." Alara nodded. When the nurse left, she stood again, drawn to the window of OR2 even though she couldn't see details from here. She watched shapes moving with intention, lights adjusting, a body being guarded by many hands. The doors opened at last. The team began to disperse, a controlled exhale. Through the glass, she saw him remove his gown, leave it in the bin, wash thoroughly, the ritual as exact as the work that came before it. He dried his hands, reached for the mask ties, and stepped into the corridor. For a heartbeat, neither of them spoke. The quiet between them was different than it had been earlier. There was something steadier in it now, as if the corridor itself had taken a long breath and was ready to release it. "How is she?" Alara asked, voice small and fierce at once. He met her eyes. She did well, the repair took. Vitals are steady. Her knees weakened, but she stayed upright. "An iris? I'll check on her now." He paused. "I'll want scans again in a few hours for both, but for this moment we're where we hope to be." Relief came not as a flood, but as warmth returning to cold hands. Alara closed her eyes, just once, then opened them. "Thank you," she said. The words felt too thin for what they carried. His response was immediate, almost reflex. "You don't have to thank me for saving my own." He stopped, the last word caught on the edge of confession. A beat. "Patience," he finished, the syllables precise, professional. Alara heard both versions, the official and the one that had nearly escaped. She studied him, and in the lines around his eyes she saw the cost of the last hours, focus sharpened into fatigue, calculation heavy as bone. Something inside her eased and tensed at the same time. "Where is she now?" she asked. "Recovery," he said. "Limited visitors until she fully wakes. You can see her when anesthesia clears her. I'll have someone come get you." She nodded. "Iris?" He glanced toward the board. "Stable. I'm going there now." He turned to go, then hesitated. "Alara," she waited. "There's more I need to say," he murmured. "Not here, not now," she agreed. "Go." He went. She held herself still until the doors swallowed him again. The waiting area seemed wider somehow, as if the walls had taken a step back. She sank into a chair and finally let a breath out all the way. A laugh, shaky and quiet, surprised her. It wasn't happiness, it was a release valve easing open after being clamped shut for too long. Minutes later, a nurse came to lead her to post-op. The recovery room was dimmed to restfulness, machines humming at softer levels. June lay tucked in a nest of warmed blankets, cheeks less ashen, lashes still against skin. The monitor traced steady hills and valleys. The sight pulled a sound from Alara she hadn't planned for, a small, broken yes. She touched the back of her daughter's hand lightly, careful not to disturb lines or sensors. "I'm here," she whispered. "You did so well. I'm here." The nurse stood quietly at the foot of the bed, reading numbers without intruding. "She'll stir soon. Small sips when she does. We'll guide you." Alara nodded, eyes not leaving June's face. "Thank you." When June's fingers twitched, Alara leaned closer. The eyelids fluttered, opened halfway, unfocused at first, then trying to find anchor. "Mom?" The small voice rasped, threaded with sleep. "I'm right here," Alara said. "Rest. You're safe." June's gaze drifted again. The body's need for recovery pulled her back under. The monitor stayed steady. Alara's breath matched it for a while. She stroked a curl off her daughter's forehead, tracing a path that had soothed night fevers and bad dreams. A half-hour passed, then an hour. Alara checked the corridor every few minutes, waiting for someone to say Iris had come through too. When footsteps approached at last, she braced, then relaxed when she saw him. "Iris is out," he said, voice softer than in the hall, softened further by the sight of June sleeping. "Numbers are good. I'll take you to her in a minute." "Both of them," Alara said, not trusting herself to add anything more. "Both," he confirmed. They stood in the low light for a moment, the machines filling the pause with their easy living rhythm. He looked at June the way he looked at a completed repair, assessing, yes, but also taking quiet satisfaction in seeing the proof of the body's will to mend. "You stayed with her through the worst of it," Alara said. It wasn't a question. She had known it in her bones. "I stayed," he said simply. He checked a chart, signed, replaced it. He turned to go, then stopped again, the same hitch as before, the same urge to speak against his better judgment. About what I almost said, he began. Ilara met his gaze. I heard it. His mouth curved, not in amusement, not quite in regret, something more complicated. I thought you might... He exhaled. There are reasons for the way everything unfolded before. I won't ask you to accept them. I'll only ask you to listen when it's time. You've earned that much, she said. Today you earned more than that. He shook his head once. Today they earned the right to begin again. He glanced toward the door. Come, Iris will want your voice nearby when she surfaces. They moved to the next bay. Iris lay smaller than her personality ever allowed, but her color was better than earlier. Ilara kissed the air above her forehead, careful of the cannula, the lines, the gentle architecture that made healing possible. She began to hum the tune the twins insisted on at bedtime, not words, just notes. Iris's brow smoothed, as if the melody had found her. Through the curtain gap she saw him charting, then speaking in low tones to the nurse. He moved a fraction slower now, fatigue clipping the edges of grace, but his precision remained intact. He finished, looked up, and for a moment their eyes held. Gratitude moved through her like warmth from a cup held between cold hands. He stepped closer, keeping his voice at that same respectful hush. I'll check on both again in 30 minutes. After that, the team will monitor hourly overnight. She nodded. Go sit for 5 minutes. Even you need to breathe. A brief surprise sound, too quiet to be a laugh, escaped him. I'll try. He started away and paused, as if one final piece of the day had to be put in order before it could end. Ilara, he said, and the name came out with a weight that belonged to neither chart nor protocol. The sentence broke, repaired itself in a cleaner form. You're not alone in this. I know, she said. I can see that now. He left her with the twins, and the room settled into an ordinary peace that felt extraordinary by contrast. Monitors counted, air flowed, heels passed in the hall. A distant cart rolled. Life, simple, stubborn, continued. Ilara stayed between the two beds, turning from one to the other, measuring breaths with her own. The blanket she had carried all day lay across her forearms, warmed now by use. In a few hours, the girls would ask for water, for stories, for the comfort of familiar nonsense. In a few days, there would be talk of therapy schedules and follow-ups and limits on climbing trees. In a few months, maybe, there would be hard conversations about the past with the man whose voice she could still feel against her skin from a lifetime ago. For now, there were 2 steady heartbeats and the awareness that the worst had been faced and held. Relief did not erase pain, but it made space around it, enough space to stand up straight. Through that space, a new uncertainty entered. Not fear, not exactly, but a question that would not go away. If the truth he nearly said out loud belonged to the girls as much as to her, what would it change? What could it heal? What might it break first? She didn't touch the question. Not yet. She folded it the way she had folded the blanket, small, careful, waiting. The hospital garden was quiet at this hour, the kind of stillness that came when most visitors had gone home. Soft light spilled from tall windows, casting gentle shapes over the narrow path that wound between benches and trimmed hedges. Ilara sat on the bench furthest from the building, hands clasped so tightly in her lap that her knuckles ached. She hadn't expected him to find her here. But she heard the footsteps before she saw him, unhurried, deliberate. Ilara, he said. She didn't look up right away. Shouldn't you be resting? I'll rest later, he replied. I needed to see you. Her eyes stayed on her hands. Why? Because I can't keep walking past you in hallways without saying the things I've been carrying for years. She drew a long, slow breath. You had your chance to say them 8 years ago. He came closer, stopping just at the edge of the bench. I left because my father was dying. The business was collapsing, without someone to take it over. I was told, no, ordered, to leave everything behind and handle it. His voice hardened at the memory. It wasn't just about stepping away from surgery. It was about being removed from the life I had built. You could have told me, she said, finally meeting his gaze. One call, one message, something. I know, he said quietly. I was 29 and thought I could shield you from the chaos. I convinced myself that disappearing would hurt less than dragging you through the mess. I was wrong. Her pulse kicked hard in her chest. You were wrong about more than that. His eyes searched hers. I didn't know about them. The words landed between them, heavy and certain. Ilara's voice faltered. What do you mean? I saw their faces, he said. I didn't need a test. I knew. From the first second, I knew they were mine. She shook her head slowly. You're making assumptions. No, he interrupted, not unkindly. I'm making a connection. The same way I recognize my own handwriting, my own voice. It's there in their eyes, in the way they hold their hands when they think, in the way they lean toward you without realizing it. Her breath caught. She looked away toward the faint glow of the windows. You can't just walk back in here and claim them. I'm not claiming them, he said. I'm telling you I want to be part of their lives. I want them to know who I am. Not because I have some right, but because they deserve the truth. She stared at the ground, trying to keep her voice steady. The truth is you left. You weren't there when they were born. You weren't there when Iris learned to walk or when June had her first fever. You weren't there when they cried for a father they'd never met. His jaw tightened, but he didn't look away. And every day I wasn't there was a day I thought about you, about what I had done, about what I had lost. I can't change the past, but I can be here now. If you'll let me. Before she could answer, the glass doors behind them opened and a nurse stepped out. Miss Whitford? Alara turned quickly. Yes? Both girls are resting well. No changes since the last check. Vitals steady. Relief swept through her in a small, contained wave. Thank you. The nurse gave a polite nod and returned inside. Alara turned back to him, the moment between them altered slightly by the update. The worst immediate fear had been eased, but the heavier, more complicated fear remained. They're safe for now, she said. That's what matters. It's not all that matters, he replied. Her voice hardened. It is for me, for them. He took a step closer, but his tone stayed calm. It's not enough to save them and walk away. I want to know them. I want them to know me. Not the version you've had to create to explain my absence, but the man who should have been there from the start. She held his gaze, feeling the weight of everything pressing in. And if I say no, then I'll wait, he said simply. I'll wait until you see that I'm not leaving this time. The certainty in his voice unsettled her more than anger would have. It was too steady, too deliberate. She remembered when his steadiness had been something she leaned on. Now it felt like something she might have to resist. She rose from the bench, the distance between them narrowing until she could see the faint lines at the corners of his eyes, lines that hadn't been there 8 years ago. You don't get to rewrite history, she said, but you might have a say in the next chapter. That's all I can promise. That's more than I thought I'd get, he said. Her chest tightened. Don't make me regret it. He didn't smile, but there was something in his expression, an acknowledgement, maybe even gratitude. I won't, for a long moment neither, moved. The hospital garden was still, the only sound the muffled hum from the building behind them. She realized that for all the noise in her mind, this was the first time in days her hands had stopped trembling. He stepped back, letting her have the space first. I'll check on them again before shift change. If anything changes, you'll hear from me immediately. She nodded, then turned toward the entrance. She didn't look back, but she felt him remain where he was until the doors closed behind her. Inside, the corridors felt warmer. The fear hadn't vanished, but it had shifted, making room for something she wasn't ready to name. She knew only that the truth he had spoken tonight could not be unsaid, and whatever came next would be shaped by it. The ward was quiet, dimmed for the night. Monitors pulsed in steady rhythm, and the air held that fragile calm that followed a day stretched to its limits. Alara had just stepped out of the twins' room when she saw him at the end of the corridor, leaning against the wall as if waiting for her. He straightened when their eyes met, walking toward her with that same measured pace she remembered from another lifetime. How are they? He asked. Resting, she replied softly. No changes. That's good. He nodded once, the weight of the day etched into his shoulders. I needed to talk to you. Somewhere that isn't a hallway. They moved together without further discussion, down to the same small garden where they had spoken earlier. The benches were empty now, the hedges casting gentle shadows on the path. The cool night wrapped around them, the kind that made each breath feel sharper, cleaner. For a moment, they didn't speak. He studied her the way he might study a delicate incision, measuring the lines, gauging what could be risked. When I saw you today, I thought the years would make it easier to keep my distance, he said. It didn't. Her voice was steady, though her heartbeat wasn't. Distance was the only thing we had left. He stepped closer, his eyes holding hers. It doesn't have to be the only thing anymore. Her pulse quickened. She could feel the warmth radiating from him, the faint brush of his breath against her hair. Every instinct told her to pull back, to guard the boundaries she had rebuilt piece by piece. And yet, she stayed. He reached up, fingers brushing along her jaw in a touch so careful it felt like a question. She didn't answer with words, just let her eyes close for a moment, allowing the contact to sink into the space between them. I've thought about this more times than I can count, he murmured. Not just this. His hand slid gently to the curve of her neck, but what it would mean, what it might change. Her breath caught. And what have you decided? That the risk is worth it. She opened her eyes, met the unflinching focus in his. "You hurt me," she whispered. "I know," he said, the words stripped of defense, "and I've hated myself for it. But I never stopped." Her hand lifted, stopping him. She wasn't ready to hear the rest, not yet. Instead, she let her palm rest against his chest, feeling the solid beat beneath her fingers. For a long moment, neither moved. Then, slowly, deliberately, he leaned in. Their foreheads touched first, a small, grounding connection. Her lashes brushed his skin. The world beyond the garden fell away. The kiss came unhurried, a slow meeting that held both restraint and depth. His hand moved to the back of her head, anchoring her gently, while hers slid to his shoulder. It was not the rush of youth. They both knew too much now for that. It was something quieter but heavier, built on the weight of everything left unsaid. When they finally parted, their faces stayed close, breaths mingling. "You make it very hard to keep my guard up," she said, her voice almost a sigh. "Then don't," he answered simply. She gave a small, helpless laugh, shaking her head. "It's not that easy." "I'm not asking for easy," he said. "I'm asking for real." Her hand slipped from his chest, fingers brushing down his arm. "Do you think they should forgive each other? Or is the past too heavy?" "Drop your answer in the comments," she murmured to the listeners, as if breaking the fourth wall for a heartbeat before her focus returned fully to him. He smiled faintly at her tone, though his eyes never lost their gravity. "I'll prove I mean it, not with words but with time, with showing up." She stepped back just enough to put space between them, though the tether between their gazes didn't break. "We'll see," she said. He didn't press her. Instead, he simply nodded, as if accepting a challenge he intended to meet every day from now on. They walked back to the ward side by side, not touching, but aware of the shift that had taken place. In the twins' room, she paused at the doorway, glancing at him once more before stepping inside. For the first time since the call that had shattered her afternoon, she felt the faintest thread of hope winding through the fear. Whether it would hold was a question for another day, but tonight it was enough. The days that followed took on a rhythm Alara hadn't expected. Mornings began with the twins stirring to soft voices and quiet checks from the nursing staff. Afternoons passed in a steady mix of therapy exercises, temperature checks, and reading sessions that filled the room with the gentle sound of turning pages. He was always there, sometimes at the bedside, holding Iris's hand while she recited lines from her favorite story, sometimes leaning over June's coloring book, listening as she explained why the sun had to be purple this time. He never hovered, never rushed them. Instead, he settled into the spaces they offered, letting them decide when to speak, when to lean closer, when to laugh. It wasn't only the girls who noticed. Nurses stopped asking if he would be present for rounds. They simply assumed it. Doctors consulted with him out of habit, knowing he understood their language as well as theirs. Even the orderly who brought meal trays began delivering an extra coffee without being asked. Alara watched all of it with a mixture of gratitude and caution. This was what she had once wanted for her children, a steady hand, an engaged presence. But wanting it and trusting it were two different things. By the fourth day, she found him in the corner of the playroom, sitting cross-legged on the floor, while the twins stacked wooden blocks into an ambitious tower. He was letting them make every decision, even the ones that made the structure lean dangerously to one side. "They'll fall," she murmured from the doorway. "Maybe," he said without looking away. "But they'll see how far they can get first." The tower collapsed 2 minutes later, followed by peals of laughter. He didn't rebuild it for them, just handed them the blocks and let them start again. That evening, Celine arrived. She was dressed for an event. Sleek dress, understated jewelry that still managed to catch the light. Her heels clicked softly on the tile as she approached the nurse's station, then the twins' room. Alara stood just inside, watching as Celine paused at the threshold. "They're doing well," Celine said, her gaze on the beds. "Better than I expected." "They're stronger than people think," Alara replied. Celine's eyes shifted to him. "Can we talk?" He glanced at the girls, then at Alara, as if asking silently if she would mind. She stepped aside but didn't leave. They moved into the corridor just far enough that their voices carried only in fragments. Celine spoke first, low and precise. "This isn't sustainable. You can't spend every day here and ignore the rest of your responsibilities." His answer came without hesitation. "This is my responsibility." Celine's mouth tightened. "I've stood by you for years, through board fights, through expansions, through the press tearing at you. And now, what?" You're going to throw that away because you can't separate personal feelings from professional duty? This isn't about separating them, he said evenly. It's about knowing which one matters more. Her posture shifted, a subtle step back that carried more weight than a raised voice. You've made your choice, then. He didn't answer. Celine waited a moment longer, searching his face for something, uncertainty, hesitation, anything she could use. When she found none, she exhaled through her nose and looked away. Goodbye, she said, and walked down the hall without turning back. He stayed where he was, shoulders square, watching until she disappeared around the corner. Then he returned to the twins' room, his expression unchanged but his presence different, more settled somehow, as if a quiet decision had been reached. That night, Alara found him in the recliner between the two beds, a book in his lap. The girls were asleep, their breathing steady. He closed the book gently and looked up at her. She's gone? Alara asked. Yes, she'll be back, she said softly. People like her don't just let go. Maybe, he replied, but it won't change anything. She studied him for a long moment. You didn't even try to stop her. I've been trying to stop the wrong things for a long time, he said. This time, I let the right thing stay. Her chest tightened at the layered meaning in his words. She pulled a chair closer to June's bed, sitting where she could see both girls. He didn't move from his spot between them, as if anchoring the room. For the first time since they'd been admitted, she let herself believe that when the twins were discharged, they wouldn't just be going home with her. They'd be leaving with a piece of something she thought had been lost forever. The air at the country house was different, fuller, easier to breathe. Afternoon light stretched across the yard, painting the grass in warm gold. Alara sat on the porch steps, her hands wrapped around a mug she'd forgotten to drink from, watching the road that led back into town. It had been a week since the twins were discharged. The house was alive again, filled with the sound of crayons scraping paper, the thump of small feet running between rooms, and questions that tumbled over each other in their eagerness to be answered. He stepped onto the porch quietly, settling beside her without asking if the spot was taken. For a while, neither spoke. The quiet wasn't strained, just the kind that came when there was no rush to fill it. I've been thinking, she said finally, her gaze on the horizon, that love is simpler than people make it. Not easier, just simpler. It isn't grand gestures or perfect timing. It's showing up every single day, especially when it's inconvenient, especially when it's hard. He listened without interrupting. She went on. Passion burns hot, but it fades if there's nothing steady under it. I used to think the fire was enough. Now I know it's the steady part that matters. The part where you're there for breakfast on the dull mornings, and at their bedside when the world tilts. He turned toward her. I can't rewrite the days I wasn't here, but I can make sure there aren't more like them. She met his eyes, searching for any trace of empty promise. What she found instead was a quiet resolve. No theatrics, no rehearsed speeches, just the steadiness she'd spoken of. Before she could answer, the screen door banged open. Iris and June burst onto the porch, laughing so hard they stumbled over each other. Iris clutched a handful of wildflowers. June had smudges of chalk dust on her cheeks. We made a game, June declared, breathless, and you both have to play. The tension between Alara and him dissolved in an instant. He rose first, reaching down to scoop June up as she squealed. Alara followed, taking Iris's hand as the girls led them into the yard, their voices filling the space with the kind of joy that left no room for anything else. For a brief moment, Alara stood still, taking it in. The laughter, the easy way he moved among them, the simple presence she'd wished for so many times. She realized that maybe this was what healing looked like, not an erasure of what came before, but a decision to keep showing up anyway. And as the game began, she let herself believe that this time, the showing up might actually last. The kitchen was alive with small sounds, the clink of mugs on the counter, the low hum of the kettle, the faint scuff of socks on the wooden floor. Alara stood at the sink, rinsing breakfast dishes, but her mind wasn't pulled toward worry the way it had been that day months ago. From the living room came the sound she loved most, her daughter's laughter bright and unguarded. This time, it wasn't alone. His voice wove through theirs, steady and warm as he read aloud from the storybook Iris had insisted on. She paused at the sink, drying her hands slowly. That same moment in the past had been shattered by a ringing phone and words that tore her world apart. Now the air in the house held something different, quiet safety, the kind that seeped in over time until it felt natural again. In the doorway, she leaned against the frame and watched. June sat cross-legged on the rug, clutching a plush toy, her face turned up toward him in rapt attention. Iris leaned into his side, following the words on the page with her finger as he read. He looked up and caught her gaze. No words passed between them, but the small curve of his mouth carried the same message she'd seen in his eyes every day since the hospital. I'm here. She thought of the long road that had brought them here, the silences, the heartbreak, the moment she almost lost the most important people in her life. And now, this simple morning felt like proof that some things could be mended, not because they returned to what they were, but because they became something new. He closed the book, and the twins erupted into chatter about which story to read next. He listened, patient as always, letting them talk over each other. When they settled on a choice, he glanced at her again, the unspoken understanding passing between them. This was the work now, showing up over and over, until it became as natural as breathing. Stepping into the room, she joined them on the rug. The girls shifted to make space, leaning into her as he began the next story. She let her hand rest lightly on his knee, not as a grand gesture, but as a quiet acknowledgement of the ground they'd reclaimed together. If this story touched you, she said softly, her voice carrying beyond the moment, don't forget to share it with someone who believes in second chances, and subscribe so you don't miss the next one. In that room, with the sunlight spilling across the floor and the sound of voices overlapping in easy comfort, Alara realized that second chances weren't about erasing the past. They were about choosing every day to stay. And for the first time in a long time, she believed they all would.